Hello and welcome to CYC News for the 20th of September 2020 and the 10th of Tut 17:37 AM. I'm Andrew Nada, and in today's news, violence in Gaza flares after Israel signs deals with Gulf states. Trump denies downplaying severity of virus. UN investigators accuse Venezuelan authorities of crimes against humanity. US West Coast fires, smoke spreads to New York and Washington. Aston Villa sign Arsenal goalkeeper Emiliano Martinez. But first to Israel, where there has been a fresh round of violence after a ceremony in Washington at which Israel and two Gulf Arab states normalized their relations. Militants fired 2 rockets into Israel last Tuesday night, while another barrage of 13 rockets were launched before dawn on Wednesday. In retaliation, the Israeli military bombed sites in Gaza that it said belonged to the Palestinian group Hamas. In Washington, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, "I'm not surprised Palestinian terrorists fired at Israel precisely during this historic ceremony. They want to turn back the peace, and that they will not succeed." The flare-up started while Mr. Netanyahu and the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates and the Bahrain were on the White House lawn signing historic normalization agreements, brokered by US President Donald Trump. But the move has deeply angered Palestinians who accuse the Arab countries of reneging on a promise not to embrace ties with Israel until Palestinian statehood is achieved. Before the UAE and Bahrain, the only other Arab countries in the Middle East to recognize Israel officially were Egypt and Jordan, who signed peace treaties in 1978 and 1994 respectively. Over to the United States now, where President Donald Trump has denied downplaying the seriousness of COVID-19, despite admitting in a recorded interview to having done that. At a televised event with voters, Mr. Trump said he had upplayed it. The claim contradicts comments Mr. Trump made to journalist Bob Woodward earlier this year when he said he minimized the virus's severity to avoid panic. According to data collected by Johns Hopkins University, more than 195,000 people have died with COVID-19 in the US since the beginning of the pandemic. At last Tuesday's town hall meeting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Mr. Trump was asked why he would downplay a pandemic that is known to disproportionately harm low-income families and minority communities. Citing a ban imposed earlier this year on people traveling from China and Europe, Mr. Trump said, "Yeah, well, I didn't downplay it. I actually, in many ways, I upplayed it in terms of action. My action was very strong. We would have lost thousands of more people had I not put the ban on. We saved a lot of lives when we did that." The US ban on foreign travelers who were recently in China came into force in early February, while a ban on travelers from European countries was introduced the following month. United Nations investigators say Venezuela's government has committed egregious violations amounting to crimes against humanity. Cases of killings, torture, violence, and disappearances were investigated in a fact-finding mission for the UN Human Rights Council. The UN team said President Nicolas Maduro and other top officials were implicated. Venezuela is suffering a severe economic and political crisis. In the report of its findings last Wednesday, the UN team said that Venezuela's security services had been engaged in a pattern of systematic violence since 2014, aimed at suppressing political opposition and generally terrorizing the population. The report said that Mr. Maduro and the Ministers of the Interior and Defense were not only aware of the crimes, but gave orders, coordinated operations, and supplied resources. It called on Venezuela to hold those responsible to account and to prevent further violations from taking place. In a statement that the mission's chairperson Marta Valinas said, the mission found reasonable grounds to believe that Venezuelan authorities and security forces have since 2014 planned and executed serious human rights violations, some of which including arbitrary killings and the systematic use of torture, amount to crimes against humanity. The report also looked into the violent response to opposition protests and the torture of people detained at them. Investigators made their conclusions after looking into 223 cases. They said almost 3,000 others corroborated patterns of violations and crimes. The reports will be presented to UN Human Rights Council member states this week, where Venezuela will have a chance to respond. Returning to the US now, where smoke from wildfires ravaging much of the west coast has spread to the east of the country, casting a haze over New York and Washington, D.C. The blazes have burnt vast areas of land and killed at least 36 people since early August. They have also caused some of the unhealthiest air on the planet in the states of Oregon, Washington, and California, according to global air quality rankings. Satellite images showed the smoke being carried into the east coast by a jet stream, a narrow zone of high-speed winds across the mid-Atlantic. On Twitter last Tuesday, the National Weather Service said, "If you looked up to the sky today, you may have seen a yellow or brown tinge. You were seeing smoke from the fires." To some health news, and the World Health Organization has recorded a record one-day rise in the number of new coronavirus infections, with 307,930 reported over 24 hours. The biggest increases in infections were reported in India, the US, and Brazil. Worldwide, there have been over 30 million confirmed cases, half of which have been across North and South America. The agency said that as of Friday, September 18, the global death toll stood at 942,989. India has the second largest number of confirmed cases in the world, behind the US. Last week, it reported nearly 2 million COVID-19 cases in August, the highest monthly tally in the world since the pandemic began, with the nation's current total over 5 million. Countries across Europe are recording a rising number of daily cases amid fears of a resurgence of the virus. Local lockdowns have been imposed in the worst affected regions, and there have been renewed appeals for people to wear face coverings and follow social distancing rules. Other countries that have seen a resurgence of the virus include Peru, Israel, South Korea, and Australia. Meanwhile, Israel imposed tougher nationwide lockdown restrictions on Friday, Jewish New Year, and will last until 3 weeks. And in sport, Aston Villa have signed goalkeeper Emiliano Martinez from fellow Premier League side Arsenal for £17 million. The 28-year-old Argentine, who made 23 appearances last season and played in the Gunners' FA Cup final win over Chelsea, has signed a 4-year deal. Villa manager Dean Smith has indicated Martinez will be a long-term key player for the club. He said it is rare to be able to buy a top-class goalkeeper who hasn't yet reached their peak age. We know how highly Arsenal rated him, and we are watching his outstanding performances last season in a trophy-winning top side. Martinez leaves Arsenal 10 years after joining as a youth team player in 2010. He is Villa's third recruit of the summer after striker Ollie Watkins signed from Brentford for a club record fee, and right back Matty Cash arrived from Nottingham Forest. And that's all for CYC News. A reminder that you can watch this news bulletin again throughout the week on YouTube. I'm Andrew Nada, and from the CYC studios in Sydney, Australia, have a great night.